Today we begin looking at the Roman Empire, and as kind of a part of that, we're going to be looking at the beginnings of Christianity as well, because that's occurs during the Roman Empire. We're going to start looking at the establishment of the Roman Empire, however. So in your notes, you have already written down some things. So we might call this the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, or just simply the Roman Empire, and then also we're going to get into the introduction of Christ's kingdom. Here is a map showing the extent of the Roman Empire at the death of Julius Caesar. Most would say that the empire begins after Julius Caesar's death, and although others would include him as an emperor because he began to take on dictatorial position. But here's what Rome controlled when Caesar died. So you can see that they control Syria and have sort of semi-control over the area of Judea and Egypt, North Africa. We have Spain, Gaul, modern-day France, certainly Italy, big parts of this peninsula, which includes Macedonia and Greece, parts of Asia Minor. So they've expanded quite a bit, and they'll expand even more as the empire grows. Well, what was the Roman Empire? It's important for us to understand that there are two periods of Roman government. There is the Roman Republic, and we've already studied that, and how let me ask you, what was the major governmental body during the Roman Republic? What was the primary governmental body? The Senate. All right, now the Senate is going to continue on, but now under the Republic, the focus is going to be on the leader or the emperor of the empire. And so we move into the Roman Empire at the death of Caesar until 476 AD, I would say. Rome technically had an empire under the Roman Republic. So because they had expanded so much, and there was the leadership, especially of Caesar, Julius Caesar. But the term Roman Empire begins with Augustus, when Rome was ruled by emperors. All right, any question there? So now, in your notes, you begin with Pax Romana, and looking at Augustus, the first citizen of Rome. You remember that after Julius Caesar was assassinated, there was civil war for a time, and at the end of that, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, which brought an end to a century of civil war. Remember, for a time, Octavian and Antony divided up the empire, but eventually began fighting one another. Returning to Rome as the triumphant ruler of the Roman world, Octavian announced his desire to restore the Republic. And so he voluntarily chose to share his powers with the Senate. Now we'll get to what he said in a moment. I want to give you an idea, some idea of the size of Rome at this time. In 28 BC, according to the census that was taken, in the empire, there were 16.5 million citizens. 16.5 million people in the empire. In Rome, there were a little over 4 million people. The revenue for the empire was $200 million. So you can get a sense of how Rome has grown from just that city to a city that controlled the peninsula, to expanding after the Punic Wars, and they keep expanding more and more. Getting back to Octavian. In 27 BC, Octavian, and Octavia means eighth son, went before the Senate and made the following speech. Listen to what he says. I shall lead you no longer. And no one will be able to say that it was to win absolute power that I did whatever has hitherto been done. Receive back also your liberty and the republic. Take over the army and the subject provinces, and govern yourselves as has been your wont. Nothing in the world would deter me from aiding you when you were in danger. I gave myself to you unstintingly. Well, the Senate was so impressed by Octavian's words of relinquishing power and giving it back to them, that they then called on him to retain his power and gave him the title Augustus, which means Most High. Now, it's always a question, how sincere was Octavius and Octavian in doing this? Was he really intending to give all the power back to the Senate, or was this just a ploy on his behalf to get the Senate to then say, oh no, we want you to stay? You know, it's just like a person who says, oh, I'm going to go. No, please stay. No. And, you know, and finally, you get begged to stay. And that's kind of what's happening here. And I'm not sure that we can ever know for certain what was in Augustus's mind. He acquires a number of titles over the years, and we're not going to necessarily look at it chronologically. Periodically, we'll look at maybe a title that's given to him, but I just want you to see kind of a list of what titles he receives. First of all, he is declared consul for life. You remember the position of consul as it was designated by the Senate? It was for a period of time, a short period of time, so that no one would gain too much power. Well, what happens? They give him that title for life. And he also has power over the other consuls. Secondly, he is given the title censor. And remember, again, that was a temporary position given by the Senate. And also Pontifex Maximus. You probably recognize the word Maximus. So he is the highest ruler. That happens after 13 BC. From the year 36 BC on, he is considered a tribune. And as head of the Roman army, he is given the title Imperator. It means successful general. It's the origin of the word emperor. Then he is given the title Princeps, first. He is considered the first citizen. It's the origin of the word prince. Then he also took for himself the family name of Caesar from his uncle, Julius, being adopted. And then, as we have seen, he was given a title of divinity, Augustus, which means Most High. So, can you see that he has basically brought all of the executive titles to himself, or been given those titles? So all the executives now wrapped up in him as the emperor, rather than the Senate. Any questions or comments on the titles? Let's look for a moment at this idea of princeps, first citizen. He was considered the first among equals. That is, even though he was princeps, that doesn't mean he was necessarily better than anyone else. But Augustus and later emperors tried to maintain the facade that they were elected officials rather than dictators. So they tried to make it look as if, well, this is the Senate that has elected me to be this. I'm not here by virtue of my own power, but in reality it was. So there's the illusion that an emperor was the most prestigious and important member of the Senate, but that each senator was simultaneously equally important. But that was not really true. That was just the facade that they put forth, the false view. In reality, the Roman emperors ruled with little input from anyone else. They did what they wanted. It wasn't like they were operating as part of the Senate. Okay, now let's look at Augustus and the Pax Romana. Under Augustus, Rome controlled the entire Mediterranean region and beyond, and with that complete control means that there was almost no warfare. So because of that, there was great prosperity and peace, economic prosperity. This peace lasted nearly 200 years. So that's a long time of not having to worry about war in your borders. More and more provincials were granted official Roman citizenship, people living in the provinces. So the Roman citizenship was growing and growing. All right, but in your notes we have this first section, prosperity and peace. Pax Romana encouraged the growth of trade because if there is less banditry and war, then you're more likely to increase the amount of trade. Secondly, there was a stable currency of gold and silver coins established. Again, that increases prosperity and trade. If everyone is using the same coinage, that makes it a lot easier to buy and sell. Next, the Roman roads that were built for the military also made it easy for traveling and for commerce, for trade. Next, freeing the Mediterranean Sea of pirates provided safe travel. Part of the Pax Romana. And lastly, the universal languages of Greek and Latin made communication and trade easier. And especially Greek having already been established throughout the Mediterranean world as a result of Alexander the Great's conquest. Most people spoke Greek. As the Romans conquered, Latin became a more common language. But Greek was the primary language of communication and trade. All right, do you have any questions or comments on what was involved in the prosperity and peace, and how the prosperity and peace really went together? All right, let's go next to the stability and order. First of all, there were continued attempts at government reform, and especially under Augustus. He placed ability above social status when he was appointing people to positions. He removed unqualified, self-seeking men from office and put people there who could do the job. And that leads to more efficient government and less corruption. And he sought to abolish corruption in the provincial governments. Remember, that has been a problem in the past. The people who are governors or rulers over the provinces oftentimes use that for their own gain. So how did he do that? Well, first he reorganized the provinces, placed some under the Senate and others under his own supervision. So some were considered Senate provinces and some were the emperor's provinces. Secondly, he ordered a census every 14 years to provide fairer taxation, so that some provinces weren't taxed beyond their population or their means, and others weren't getting off easy. So having a census every 14 years told him exactly how many people were living there, and so he knew better what to expect by way of taxation. Made it more fair. Now, we know, because we know the Bible, that this census that Caesar Augustus established had a godly purpose on top of his own government reform purpose, right? Because it was at one of the census, every 14 years, that Joseph and Mary have to go to Bethlehem to register. And you know the rest of the story. Yeah. So in addition to government reform, Augustus also attempted social reform. He realized that you can't have a state that is not corrupt if you've got people that are corrupt. And so he encouraged the passage of laws that promoted family life and rewarded families with many children, because there was a movement among Romans, especially well-to-do Romans, to not have children. I think partly out of their own selfishness, just like we have in our country today. A lot of people that are getting married in this present time in our country don't wish to have children because they don't want to give up their lifestyle. They don't want to give up their own desires. That's simply a fact of life today. And it's even more pronounced in Europe. In Europe, native Europeans are not reproducing themselves. Like I read a report a few years ago that indicates that among native Europeans, that is not counting the immigrants that have come in the last few decades, but among native Europeans, they have already reached the point of no return, where it is impossible actually for them to replenish the population that is dying off. So essentially, native Europeans have already lost Europe. It just hasn't come to fruition yet. Now, the difference is among immigrants, that's not true. And the largest group of immigrants into continental Europe are Muslims. Are Muslims refraining from having children? Oh no, they're having lots of children. And so they're going to be taking over Europe at some point in the future, simply because eventually their numbers will outnumber those that are native European. And there doesn't seem to be anything that anybody can do to reverse it. As I said, the person who wrote this article said Europe is beyond the point of return. Now, what about this country? We are heading the same direction because many younger people are choosing not to have children. And so our population is going to decrease. That's one reason why some people want to have open borders and allow all kinds of immigration, because they can't support their social programs. They can't support all the money they want to spend unless they get more population to contribute to that. So you may hear people talking about, oh, we need immigrants because otherwise they won't be able to pay Social Security, and we need the taxes that they'll bring. And plus they'll vote for them, for a particular political party. All right, so that was happening back then. Augustus said we need to promote families, and so he encouraged that by law. So, reducing taxes on people that had families and so on. He punished immorality. As we'll see in future emperors, that's not going to last very long. Some of them are the most immoral people you could ever come across. But Augustus felt he needed to change society. Thirdly, he placed limits on extravagant living. He felt that a problem among the rich was that they were spending so much money and living so luxuriously. And so he put a limit on how much they could spend on those kind of things, how much they could spend on themselves. Because he saw that as leading to immorality. Next, we notice that despite the laws, his moral reforms failed. So just on the surface, from what you know, what would you say is the reason for the failure of his reforms? Can anybody get to the heart of the matter?
Sin.
Yeah. In order for moral reform to take place, there has to be a change in people's hearts. You have to deal with sin, and the only way to do that is by coming to Jesus Christ, or before the birth of Christ, coming to God, Yahweh God. And of course, they had none of that, and so his reforms failed, as they always do. Well, this was a golden age under the rule of Augustus. Here's some of the things we've already talked about. A different slide that somebody made that I thought was beneficial for us. So he attempted to reform public morals. began the practice of declaring emperors gods and of picking their own successors. He called Halley's Comet the spirit of Caesar. You know, a comet comes, that's a momentous event. He said it's the spirit of Caesar. He built, maintained infrastructure, encouraged growth of business, established fire and police departments, had a strong money system, we mentioned, extended citizenship, which we've mentioned also. He said he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. So he built a lot of structures out of marble. And of course, Jesus was born during his reign. Suetonius, who is the foremost chronicler of the emperors, wrote a massive number of books on the emperors, described the elderly Augustus this way. His vision had faded in his left eye, his teeth were few, widely spaced, and worn down. His hair wispy and yellowed. His skin was irritated by scratching and vehement scraping, so that he had chronic rough spots resembling ringworm. So as Augustus neared death, he was not in very good shape. But at least he was nearing death, a natural death, unlike some of his successors. We're going to look at the successors of Augustus, but we're going to hold off on that until Wednesday. So I'm going to give you time now to work on the assignment for tomorrow, which is to read and take notes on pages 98 to 106. Do the questions on page 106 on the same page that you already did questions on page 98. Is that clear to everybody? Any questions? No. So you're reading and taking notes on pages 98 to 106. Do the questions on 106 on the same page that you did page 98.